They tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat. You all know the old chestnut, which some attribute to the late comedian Alan King, purporting to encapsulate the Jewish historical experience and the purpose of every Jewish celebration. I prefer the Haggadah's original. In every age, an enemy rises to destroy us, yet through God's saving power we endure. But both versions ring true. Pharaoh, Haman, Hadrian, Ferdinand and Isabella, Hitler. For too many generations of Jews, the fight to survive defined Jewish existence. And for generations more fortunate, staving off the next threat to Jewish well-being became the galvanizing force of Jewish activism and expression. Though observed this year tomorrow night and Sunday so as not to coincide with Shabbat, tonight begins Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av. On this date, according to Mishnah and Talmud, the first and second temples both were destroyed. The first in 586 BCE by the Babylonians, and the second in 70 CE by the Romans. But that's not all believed to have occurred on this day of collective grief. On the 9th of Av, 1290, Edward I drove the Jews from England. On the 9th of Av, 1492, we were expelled from Spain. Hitler, too, chose the day to inflict particular agony. And many other tragedies have been linked to the sorrowful anniversary, some with historical accuracy, others for symbolic purpose. The Talmud teaches that the day was foreordained as one of national disaster because on that date, early in Israel's desert wanderings, the 10 faithless spies dispatched by Moses to scout Canaan returned reporting that the land was inhabited by giants and therefore unconquerable. And the people, despite all evidence of God's power on their side, believed them. As punishment for that failure of vision and trust, the day was destined to be one of anguish for ages to come. And so the 9th of Av came to embody Jewish suffering. It won't surprise you to hear that the builders of Reform Judaism in Germany and the United States, while recognizing the significance of the temple's destruction and of our exile and expulsion, did not view them as wholly tragic. Rather, they believed a Jewish diaspora could advance the Jewish mission of serving as a light to the nations. Certainly, they did not pray for the restoration of sacrificial worship. One of 19th century American Judaism's towering figures, Rabbi David Einhorn, who served Temple Bethel, with which Temple Emanu-El merged, explained, Reform recognizes in the flaming Temple Mount not a curtailment, but rather a continuation of the divine work of salvation, the conveyance of divinity to all the children of this earth for which Israel has been ordained. From the ashes of that one temple, thousands of places of worship came forth. From the grave of animal sacrifice and separate priesthood rose the magnificent phenomenon of the congregation of priests scattered over the entire world. He considered Tisha B'Av not a day of national catastrophe, but one of prophetic fulfillment, and believed it should be marked as such. And then in the last century, with the ultimate restoration of Israel as a Jewish homeland after 2,000 years, other Jewish leaders believed that Tisha B'Av ought to be transformed from a day of mourning to one of rejoicing, as Zechariah prophesied it would be. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, he proclaimed, The fast shall be to the house of Judah joy and gladness and cheerful feasting. The debate about the observance of Tisha B'Av reflects a tension ongoing even today, not about Tisha B'Av per se, but about how we view and teach Jewish identity and purpose. Do we fast or do we feast? Or as some have put it, should we be about oi or joy? Do we spend our energy circling the wagons of self-defense, agonizing over every threat, be it anti-Semitism in America or Europe or hatred of Israel, all of which are real? Or do we face outward to engage with the world and publicly, fearlessly celebrate the joys of Judaism? It is, of course, a false dilemma. But the discussion is not unimportant. In an era of dwindling non-Orthodox affiliation, we cannot attract Jews or non-Jews to Jewish life by scaring them about what they may be getting themselves into. They need to experience the happiness and beauty and affirmation that Jewish life provides. But we would also be naive to think that all is fine and well in the Jewish world, and that there are no present, even imminent threats. The rise of anti-Semitic violence, ignorance about the Holocaust, and the demonization of Israel are all too real. Tisha B'Av, with its remembrance and mourning of tragedies past, can be for us an expression of communal solidarity, Klal Yisrael, our commitment to Jewish peoplehood, and indeed, survival. As religiously liberal Jews, we balance two important priorities: our particular concerns and our universal responsibilities. We believe that as Jews, we have a duty to serve the wider world. Abraham, after all, was summoned to create a people through which all other peoples of the earth would be blessed. That is our sacred story. To be sure, other religious communities hear the same calling through their holy texts. But for liberal religionists, sometimes universal aspirations can overshadow their particular roots. For example, I would imagine for many of us the phrase tikkun olam, repairing the world, is more familiar than Klal Yisrael. And as the rebirth of the state of Israel and its early struggles for survival, not to mention the desperate plight of European Jewry prior to Israel's founding, recede in history, our people's particular experience will become less and less significant to future generations of Jews. One need only examine the attitudes of many younger liberal Jews toward Israel, or their lack of familiarity with the history of anti-Semitism to see this, despite the fact that anti-Semitism is alive and well in the 21st century, and Israel is under frequent physical and constant rhetorical attack. At this very moment, Israel is defending its citizens against attacks from Islamic Jihad in Gaza, which will almost certainly result in the tragic deaths of innocent Palestinians, whose well-being is held captive to terrorists' ambitions. Last week, we learned that a United Nations appointee charged with investigating fairly allegations of human rights violations in Israel and the territories openly questioned Israel's membership in the international body and accused the, quote, Jewish lobby of largely controlling social media and attempting to undermine the agency's work. How can an official whose views of Israel are so biased serve on such a commission? Too often, that's just the case with the UN. And last month, in a resolution passed with overwhelming support, the Presbyterian Church USA's General Assembly accused the Israeli government of apartheid, just the latest instance in a pattern of unnuanced, unbalanced Mideast commentary. Fortunately, the local Presbyterian leaders with whom we work have repeatedly and publicly denounced such missives. It shouldn't need to be said that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is more complex than what any 189-word statement can convey, but apparently it does need to be said. Certainly non-Jews and Jews can be critical of the Israeli government's policies, and at times we should be. But we must never forget or let others neglect the broader context of what transpires there, or the expressed desires of Israel's enemies to destroy her. And if we want our children to be able to respond to anti-Semitic and anti-Israel rhetoric on the college campus, and explain to their classmates why being proudly Jewish shouldn't disqualify them from progressive social justice tikkun olam circles, then Klal Yisrael, commitment to Jewish peoplehood, needs to be more of an educational priority for us. And with all that said, it is not the oi, but rather the joy of Jewish life, its beauty, its ethics, its sanctification of our happiness that we must celebrate and lift up for all to see. That is, after all, what countless generations of Jews before us struggled, even died to protect and defend. No less a lion-hearted fighter of anti-Semitism than Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt reminded us in her book and in our temple that we must avoid letting this longest hatred become the linchpin of Jewish identity. Jewish tradition in all its manifestations, religious, secular, intellectual, communal, artistic, and so much more, is far too valuable to be tossed aside and replaced with a singular concentration on the fight against hatred. We must never stop fighting the good fight, even as we rejoice in who we are. And as for Tisha B'Av, the collection of Midrashim on the Book of Lamentations, read in observance of the day, teaches that on the 9th of Av, the Messiah will one day be born, ushering in an age of peace. As religious liberals, we may believe differently, that we are the ones who will bring that time, but we must believe it will come. Then all fasts will end, including those of the hungry who have no choice in the matter, and all of us will feast together at the table of a common humanity. Ken Yehi Ratzon.